Welcome to today's webinar on low impact development funded by the Department of Ecology. My name is Catherine Taylor and I will be facilitating the webinar today. And today's topic is bioretention facilities and rain gardens. Our presenters are Chris Webb, civil engineer, and landscape designer and business owner Jesse Bloom. These webinars have been created in partnership with the Washington Association of Landscape Professionals, or WALP, and the Washington State Nursery and Landscape Association, or WSNLA. If you are not already a member or are not familiar with these organizations, please visit their websites for a lot of great resources. These organizations also have magazines in which they are featuring 4 articles between the months of April and August on low impact development. Before I pass the webinar over to today's presenters, I'm going to talk about low impact development, how it helps to manage stormwater, and the upcoming regulation changes that will affect the use of low impact development on new development and redevelopment projects in Washington State. LID, or low impact development, is an approach to managing stormwater that helps to protect water quality, reduces or slows runoff amounts, restoring groundwater recharge, and healthy habitats. Some of the techniques included in low-impact development are rain gardens, which are shallow depressions with amended soils and vegetation designed to mimic forest floors that absorb and filter stormwater. Bioretention facilities, which are much like rain gardens but are engineered and modeled to store and treat a specific amount of water. Permeable pavements, which have voids in its structure intended to allow passage of water through the pavement and into the ground. Roofs or walls layered with waterproofing materials, growing medium, and vegetation designed to help slow water, and rainwater harvesting systems, which use barrels or cisterns to capture rainwater for uses like irrigation or flushing toilets. So why are we using LID and why is stormwater bad? Well, stormwater runoff is the result of rainfall on impervious surfaces such as roads and rooftops, where it picks up pollutants and carries them to local waterways. Stormwater runoff is one of the largest sources of pollutants in urbanized areas of Washington State and is the largest contributor of pollutants entering the Puget Sound. Stormwater runoff can lead to erosion, as you can see in the top right photo, pollution of soils and water bodies, sedimentation, combined sewage overflows, and loss of wildlife habitat. Through these principles of conserving trees, plants, and healthy soils and minimizing impervious surfaces, native vegetation loss, and stormwater runoff, LID strives to manage stormwater where it falls, increasing the area and distribution of stormwater infiltration, thereby reducing its concentrated entry into water bodies. LID has many benefits, the most important of which are that it reduces and slows stormwater runoff, protects water quality, and restores ecosystem services. Stormwater is regulated by the Clean Water Act, the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, the Washington State Department of Ecology, and by municipal permits. Regulatory changes are coming to Washington State. The Department of Ecology is making regulatory changes to stormwater management and the use of LID to address the negative impacts of stormwater in our urban and natural landscape. Regulation changes will take place between 2015 and 2018, with most cities and counties adopting changes by 2016. In Western Washington, regulations will require the use of low-impact development on new development or redevelopment projects like housing or commercial developments to help manage stormwater on site. In Eastern Washington, the use of LID will simply be allowed. Each city and county will decide on how to adopt these changes. The Department of Ecology stormwater regulations will be the minimum. Some cities and counties may decide to expand upon these regulations. Check with your local planning departments to understand exactly how these regulations will be applied in your area. Because cities and counties are currently determining how they will adopt these new regulations, now is a good time to get in touch with your local officials to give your input on how these regulations should take effect. The Municipal Research and Services Center of Washington is a great resource for finding the right officials to contact. Contact officials in the planning departments of your cities and Our first presenter is Chris Webb, a licensed professional civil engineer and lead fellow with Mall Foster and Alonji. His technical expertise and professional experience are focused on the promotion and implementation of sustainable development. He currently serves on the Technical Advisory Committee for the 2012 Eastern Washington Low Impact Development Manual and was on the Advisory Committee of the 2005 Low Impact Development Technical Guidance Manual for Puget Sound. Our second presenter is Jessie Bloom, an award-winning landscape professional. Jessie comes from a strong background of horticulture and environmental science. In early 2000, she started her business, Northwest Bloom, to fill a niche for organic and ecological landscaping. Jessie has designed and installed hundreds of rain gardens, including King County's largest residential rain garden in Kirkland. She teaches rain garden workshops to professionals and homeowners for Washington State University Extension, Seattle Public Utilities, and at the Northwest Garden Show. Unfortunately, due to some technical difficulties, the audio from the first 3 slides of Chris Webb's presentation, where he introduces himself and the topics he's going to speak about, was lost. The audio will begin on his 4th slide. We apologize for the inconvenience.
So to address the issue of the difference between a bioretention cell and a rain garden is really, there are many rain gardens that would look identical to what is considered a bioretention cell, and but the definition that is emerging and promoted by the Department of Ecology, you can see there on your screen, is that bioretention cells are really those are typically designed by an engineer with tight specifications where we're using fully replaced soil. We're not just tilling compost into native soil, typically built by a contractor, inspected by an agency, and are part of a regulated stormwater system. And as engineers, we can account for bioretention cells that meet these specifications in a different way than we can count the presence of a rain garden, which has looser specifications, maybe built by a homeowner or in concert with landscape professionals such as yourselves. Bioretention cells can be built on a private lot or can be built in the public right-of-way as part of the public stormwater system. Rain gardens, on the other hand, are, while there is quite a bit of overlap of what would be considered a bioretention cell, they are typically based on sizing tables, or they are allowed to be based on sizing tables, allowing the design to be done by non-engineers using maybe some pre-size, rather than running the kind of complex modeling software that engineers typically run to design bioretention systems. Specifications can be a little bit looser when compared, and mostly that relates to the soil. These cells can be have fully replaced soils, or in some cases we can simply amend native soils, and that can, which is not allowed in a bioretention cell, and of course built by landscape professionals such as yourselves, contractors, or community groups and homeowners, perhaps with the assistance of a landscape professional. And they're usually not inspected by an agency and part of a formal drainage system. This graphic is intended to kind of discuss what I think are the significant components of a bioretention cell. And so starting from the top, of course, we have the plants. And the plants have several functions. A large function that they have is supporting the microbial community in the soil and maintaining healthy soil, because so much of the value of a bioretention cell is occurring in the soil, with those microbes breaking down pollutants such as hydrocarbons, the organic material absorbing metals, and and then the soil actually functioning similar to a sponge and holding water back to be evaporated. Second there, number 2, is freeboard. This is where, this is the elevation, the amount of vertical distance between the top of the overflow, because all rain gardens have some form of overflow, or typically do, bioretention in rain gardens. I'm going to work really hard to keep the nomenclature distinct myself. And that is typically 6 inches, though in some maybe urban settings, maybe with a vertical sidewall, could be as high as 12, but typically 6 inches. And then we account for some amount of ponding on the surface. That's infrequent ponding that is intended to drain down, certainly in a matter of hours and not a matter of days, both for, and that, usually we like to see ponding, a few times a winter, maybe a dozen times a winter or so, but these cells are not intended to be wetland-like at all. They're meant to fill up and then drain down. And the plant community that is supported are not wetland plants. They are shrubby type upland species, and there are many published lists of plants that are appropriate. The bioretention soil mixture, or BSM, is really, I think, the mulch. The mulch is there, it's not labeled, but the mulch is, there it is, arborist mulch. So there's an area, the mulch is an area of much discussion and debate within the design community, but typically the mulch is considered an arborist mulch, which is wood chips that would come out of a chipper. The intent there is, of course, weed control, but it is also a very important surface for bioretention cells that are intended for water quality function, because over 90% of the pollutants get trapped right up in that mulch and are easy to remove. We have our overflow structure to maintain our storage volume there at 6 inches or 12, but to maintain that. And then moving around, we have our bioretention soil mixture, which is typically a 60-40 mix of sand and compost. So this is a very loose sandy loam, which has an infiltration rate of usually 2 to 4 to maybe as high as 12 inches an hour, is mixed on site or can be purchased. And then moving around, we've got our under drain pipe, which is typically put in place on rain gardens or bioretention cells that are intended to have a water quality function, and that's to maintain aerobic conditions and to not have saturated water in the bioretention soil mixture, so we can maintain our required depth of 18 inches minimum to achieve water quality goals. And we use a gravel filter blanket above the under drain pipe, because filter fabric is not allowed or should never be used in a rain garden or bioretention cell. We have our under drain pipe, which serves the purpose you could imagine to maintain a aerobic zone. But then in some rain gardens, we also build in a retention zone. And this is also the subject of a lot of research and debate right now in the design community about the function. And WSU, Puyallup, they are researching the function of that zone, and without getting too into the details, some interesting functions can happen in that retention zone because it fluctuates between aerobic and anaerobic conditions, and such functions as denitrification can occur there, and we can convert potentially nitrates into nitrogen gas by that fluctuation. And then we have our undisturbed soil. A rain garden, on the other hand, can look very, very similar to the prior slide, or it can look more like this diagram, which is from the Rain Garden Handbook, which is showing a much more simple cross-section, which could have a piped entry or sheet flow entry of water into the cell, and could potentially be fully replaced soil or compost tilled into native soil if the native soil is of the right profile. And you can see there the overflow is could be a lower edge with some rock to prevent erosion. And so it's just a much more simplified cross-section. There are many, many configurations that can be applied to these cells and to rain gardens. That little vignette drawing on the right there is showing how on a rain garden that I did several years ago, we actually integrated a level spreader into the cross-section design because we wanted the discharge was going to be to the surface. And so this little section is also showing an integrated infiltration trench below. I don't want to get too into the technical nuances, but the point from this is that no two rain gardens are alike, and that many, many different configurations are appropriate. And here are some of the components of the design that could vary: the presence or absence of a recharge zone, the presence or absence of an underdrain, the presence or absence of an integrated infiltration trench, integrated level spreader, and then many, many types of entry designs, which is how to control the water entering the rain garden or bioretention cell, be it with a forebay, which is where we have a small basin at the head end, which can trap a lot of pollutants up in a very concentrated area, to rock pads, sheet flow along an edge, or even a broken curb in a street application. Rain gardens or bioretentions also can occur in a planter box. This one is, the picture on the right is from a project down in Portland that I visited. But so bioretention cells can be in an urban environment where there's no infiltration happening here. Because it's fully lined in that case with concrete. The point of this cell is to simply evapotranspirate and retain stormwater and slow the water down and potentially provide a water quality function for certain roofing materials. And I've worked on projects where we have, and you'll see some photos of them, where we've used this concept to integrate the rain garden or bioretention cell right into the architecture. In an urban setting, this is a project of mine that's in downtown Seattle, where this is a bioretention cell that is right in the urban setting. We have hard edges. It's integrated as part of the landscape architecture. It's one of the currently one of the few that are in the real urban core of Seattle. What you don't see in this picture is underneath the sidewalk, there's actually some infiltration chambers which increase the infiltration area. And for this type of design, we had to consider a lot of issues like tripping hazard of the pedestrians. We had to consider if this was going to compromise flooding of the basement of the building and so on. But this is an example of one way a rain garden or bioretention cell can look. This is another example of a bioretention cell project of mine that's for the Federal Way Library, where we integrated the bioretention cell right into the architecture so that when you're in the building, you can look out on the bioretention cell. And many people might not actually realize that, a casual observer might not realize it's there, but you can see the overflow structure. This is just another way that a bioretention cell can look. This is another one, which maybe is a little more, this cell is in Bellingham. This was the first bioretention cell built in the public right-of-way by a private developer. This is providing water quality treatment only for this little road extension. And this cross-section probably looks a little more what maybe most people consider. It's a very discrete sort of round area with an overflow structure there. And in this case, we used a little river rock entry to slow water down and to have it enter the bioretention cell in a controlled way. This is before the plants got put in, obviously. Another example of a configuration that can work. The city of Portland and the city of, these pictures are from Portland. They are, the city of Portland has a combined sewer overflow issue. The sewers, the storm sewer and the sanitary sewer are in the same pipe in many old areas of Portland, and that pipe gets overwhelmed in storm events and raw sewage spills out into various water bodies. And to address that, city of Portland, similarly in Seattle, have been going around and retrofitting public streets with cells like this, which can fit in between the curb and the sidewalk, as you can see, and just trying to do a distributed installation of planted cells stitched throughout the city to really take the load off of the combined sewer. Another example from Portland, which I really like, it shows two things here. One, of course, is the sort of rain garden man there in the picture on the right. which is a sculpture that's right in their rain garden cell at the entrance of this New Seasons Market. But the other thing, which I think is a more powerful message, is in many jurisdictions, the requirement for landscaping and the requirement for stormwater management can occur in the same location, which actually, from a developer point of view, will allow developers in some cases to build what is essentially a private stormwater management element, partially or completely in the public right-of-way. That's not allowed in every jurisdiction, but I think with bioretention, it's something that is possible, and I think is a huge value that's created. This is another installation from Portland on the left and Seattle on the right, showing a retrofit. To address cost, this is some information that is presented from the City of Seattle's Green Stormwater Infrastructure Project. This will be a little too much to take in right in this setting, but it's a way of saying that low impact development and bioretention is not always more expensive. And in fact, many cases, it can be less expensive and quite a bit less expensive to provide stormwater management with LID than it is with traditional. For example, in a traditional parking lot application where a developer would have to build landscaping and parking lot islands anyway, spending, well, you all probably know better prices than me, but $4 or $5, maybe $6 a square foot for that landscaping. If that landscaping is only providing aesthetic function and not providing any stormwater treatment function, and then the developer goes and separately builds single-purpose stormwater treatment infrastructure, that is essentially a waste of money, because if those functions occur in the same location, if we use our required landscaping for our stormwater treatment, it is the most cost-effective stormwater treatment method, bar none, out there, regardless of soil type, even if the bioretention cell is lined. When is our next poll? Is it? It's the next slide. Okay. Great. Oh, there's a question here, which I'm going to read here. How many years ago was that built, and is the mulch? Okay, so this is, I guess, does everybody sees that question, right? No. Oh, no. The question is from one of the viewers. She's asking here regarding the photo shown of the bioretention cell in Bellingham that did not yet have the plants in it. How many years ago was that built, and is the mulch zone staying in place, or are they having any issues with the arborist chips migrating into the basin? In that case, we have not had that issue. We have not had the chips floating away. They do tend to get a little bit waterlogged, and I think do tend to stay put after a while. Certain mulches do float, and that is a concern. But I think after a period of time, they do tend to get a little bit waterlogged and do tend to stay put. At this point, the understanding in the design community is that is the best option for mulch. Other folks, I think you could probably make a case that if you had the right compost mulch, if it was coarse enough, that you could use it as a mulch, and I think that's legitimate. As an engineer, I've had a hard time with that because there's such a wide variability in what people consider coarse mulch, and so a limitation, a coarse compost. So a limitation I have is when specifying these products on projects is to come up with something that's easily able to be purchased and easily able to be verified that it meets the specification. And so I think there probably are a wider range of mulches that are possible, but it all depends. If you all are building them yourselves and can source that mulch yourselves, you can find something that will work for you. As an engineer, my choices are a little more limited as I'm speccing these out. Oh, and the question about when was that built? That was built, I believe, in 2007, around that time. Excuse me. So we are going to put another poll out there as we move into the design phase. I'm curious to know what you all think is the most challenging design component of a rain garden. These are some of the key design issues, as far as I can tell, in my work. Is, of course, no surprise there, selecting the plants, though frankly that is with all due respect to the plant people on the call, that for me is the least of the worries in terms of issues that have come up in the past. Mulch, which we've discussed, is one that has been a particularly thorny issue until we came around to this idea of using these arborist chips, and then frankly it's a lot easier because we don't have to deal with fines, because that's the issue with mulches that have not worked. I've had projects where we've had mulch delivered, we thought we spec'd it out well, it had a lot of fines in it, it sealed the surface, and we have ponding issues. The bioretention soil mix is clearly I think the most important, and for a long time was the most vexing issue to the design community, because a lot of the early LID design information that was coming out of Chesapeake Bay region and otherwise included topsoil in the bioretention soil mix. And I don't know how long ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, regionally it was recognized that that was a problem, that 90% of the problems we were having with bioretention soil mix was related to the topsoil component because of a lack of spec of that material. But now that we have a sand compost mix, those problems have largely abated, and especially because, at least in Puget Sound, that material is able to be purchased from a vendor pre-mixed, which has reduced the headaches dramatically for designers. Sizing of the cells, for non-engineers, that's typically going to be done based on sizing tables. Determination of the infiltration rate of the native soil, again, this is probably more of an engineering issue where we're doing a little more complex modeling. However, some of the sizing table can probably, some of the sizing that is done based on tables can correlate sizing to textural soil analysis. Determination of the infiltration rate for the bioretention soil mix is another issue about what to assume, and again, this is probably more germane to an engineering, for an engineering designed bioretention cell, but the sizing of the cell is highly related to the rate at which the bioretention soil mix infiltrates, and so the ecology allows us to use up to 12 inches an hour, and we usually use around 2 to 4 for design. We've mentioned already the under-drain design is a design issue that is particularly applicable to bioretention cells that are for performing water quality treatment functions, where it's really important that we maintain aerobic conditions in the soil. The entry design allows some great opportunities for creativity to create aesthetically pleasing and functional entry designs that slow the water down and perhaps trap as many pollutants as we can up at the head end of the cell, and then detailing the overflow, be it a sheet flow over the top edge of the cell or through some sort of a structure. With construction, and this is really something that probably Jesse will dive into in greater detail, but from my experience on projects of mine that have been in construction, I see staging issues as being critically important, staging materials, keeping other people from staging materials in what will ultimately become the bioretention cell or rain garden. Sourcing materials, and that's probably right, that is probably one of the most important, is to find a good source to either create, mix yourself, or purchase bioretention soil mix. Those of you more in the Puget Sound area will have no problem securing that from a vendor. Maybe some of you actually are vendors of the soil, or mixing it yourself. On projects of my own, having contractors mix the soil themselves has been very problematic, again, mostly because of specifications and trying to articulate the issues. The gravel filter blanket, that requirement is to be a particular gradation to separate the materials. This is to be used in place of where you would normally think to use a geotextile, and of course the mulch. Testing your soil to see that it meets specification is very important to make sure that if you're purchasing it from a vendor, that you're getting a nice homogeneous mix that has the right amount of sand, and you didn't get a scoop off the bottom of the pile that maybe has too many fines and so forth. And there are testing for that to verify infiltration rate. Preventing compaction is critical, both of the surface itself when it's built as well as the subsoil to maintain its function to infiltrate. And setting grades. This has been a particularly vexing construction issue for me as well. to where we have our nice cross-section showing our 6 inches of freeboard and our 6 inches of ponding, and many, many cells that have been built by homeowners or by smaller contractors. Have very often, when the dust settles on the whole thing, we have maybe 1 inch of freeboard and maybe 1 inch of ponding, and that has been problematic. And then, of course, providing irrigation to maintain plants. What's that? And then we're going to put another poll out there. So in terms of getting your feedback on what you think the most vexing or challenging construction issues are. So some lessons learned here as we wrap up this section is number 1 is, of course, no filter fabric. That is an early source of early failures of some of the early notable failures of bioretention cells on the East Coast were related to the use of filter fabric, so that is not to be used. Cells, bioretention cells need to fill up and drain down like a bathtub, so the bottom needs to be flat. This is an issue this way because they're not bioswales. The idea is not to convey water, but to simply allow it to fill up and drain down. Base flows. This is a lesson learned from me. You know, very often we get all of our footing drains and all of our roof leaders, and we put them all together and we run them into our stormwater system. And I found out the hard way on a project where if your footing drain intercepts a small seep, you can add a base flow to your rain garden, which will cause it to be saturated more often at the time, and the plant community will not thrive. So that was a lesson learned. Don't make the cells too big. These are supposed to be small and distributed throughout the site, and we're not trying to do one big cell for a large site. So when they get too big, that means contractors typically use large equipment, which tends to cause compaction, and there's a lot of merit in keeping things small. Integration with surrounding grades and specifying elevations I mentioned. The soil spec we've discussed, getting that spec right, using the regional spec, a 60-40 blend of sand and compost, getting our plants right, getting our mulch correct, and making sure the O&M is provided, and that's a huge issue. Like any stormwater system, these systems need to be maintained, and too often stormwater systems are not. So within construction, erosion control, of course, is an issue. In terms of being a little lesson learned, that is a rain garden on the upper right there of mine where the soil spec was not correct, and that was the ponding condition, and that water hung around way too long, and we had to fully replace that soil. So each of these lessons learned I'm sharing are kind of from my own experience. Compaction of subsoil, like we discussed. Pre-mixing versus site mixing soil versus tilling. Pre-mixing as a designer is certainly my preferred. Those of you who feel comfortable in mixing your own sand and compost, probably fine. I've had problems in the past with site mixed soil because communication doesn't happen, and we get topsoil mixed in there, and we end up having problems. Testing, getting testing of the soil, getting those, or working with approved vendors. And my preference as a designer is to work with approved vendors. And then, of course, make sure we have our temporary irrigation to maintain our plants. Okay, lastly, I want to address operation and maintenance, about what is typically part of it for a bioretention cell, and really it's overall is probably some things that are more in the realms of the obvious here. We're removing trash. We're using IPM to remove pests because these are for stormwater management. We don't want to be using a lot of pesticides and fertilizers if we need them. Perhaps an organic slow release, but prefer that we don't add nutrients. The soil is usually plenty healthy to support the plants. We're wanting to maintain the plants, weed, prune, replace, and remove as needed. And really, the mulch, frankly, for me, is the most important piece of maintenance. And it's about removing contaminated mulch as needed, and that's really on a visual basis, because really that's where our pollutants are. And so if these cells are serving a water quality function, removing that mulch also removes the pollutants, and we typically dispose of that with the trash. And then if it's contaminated, if it's serving a water quality function, and then maintaining our structures by cleaning out our catch basins and so forth. So I believe that, business opportunities, and I'm a little bit over time on my section, so I'm going to move through this a little bit quickly. As you heard in the beginning from Patty, this The regulations are such that low-impact development is going to be required as an approach for all development projects. There is a huge business opportunity here for those of you interested to pursue it in pursuing homeowner-built rain gardens, and you can see a list here of what I think are some of the major categories of potential clients that will be building these systems, but this is just the beginning, and including nationally. EPA is setting stormwater standards nationally that is based on a retention infiltration approach, and so these trends are far along here and are going to be going national. And so I wish you the best of luck in pursuing these opportunities. Thank you. Oh, and we have a poll, sorry. We have a poll here to get your take on what you think the most fruitful business opportunities might be. Great.
And then there was a question that actually...
Oh, we had a question come in?
Yeah, answer it after, it's right here.
Okay. There is a person here asking, she mentioned she works at a golf course with a salmon stream, and the soil is not very good, not very porous, and from October through April, it is generally very wet with a number of areas of standing water, and some drainage pipes exist. What opportunities for rain gardens or bioretention areas exist with that result? Any particular issues related to a golf course other than the location away from play? In an area where we've got areas of standing water already, and the question is, what is the issue that we're trying to solve with this bioretention cell? When I think of golf course, the thing I think of first is nutrients, from fertilizer to maintain the turf areas, and rain gardens will be particularly good at addressing nutrient areas. And the idea is to try and slow the water down and hold the water back in that area. And if the water is ponding over the site, it seems like you may have an issue where we need to maintain positive drainage to a rain garden cell so that our water is not ponding in areas that it shouldn't. But the hope here is not to force more water into the ground than when in there in the forested condition. So in a native forest, when we had clay soils, we had a lot of evapotranspiration taking place and not much deep infiltration. And so the idea would be to replicate that in the situation that you're discussing. So exploiting evapotranspiration is the goal, but it is a tricky situation when you are working in an area that doesn't infiltrate well and water is already ponding. It seems like there may be other issues that need to get solved, but I do feel like there is a role there, particularly addressing nutrients.
There's another question coming in, and for now we're going to hold the questions till the end of the presentation. So next we're going to have Jessie Bloom give her presentation. Thanks so much, Chris. That was fabulous.
All right. Well, thank you guys. That was a great presentation by Chris, and I'm basically following up with less technical information and more business opportunity information. And what I've done as a landscape professional to build a lot of rain gardens, as Patty mentioned, we've done probably hundreds by now. Started in about 2003 building rain gardens, and they are a feature in most of our landscapes. So to give you a little background about myself, I just wanted to point out I'm not an engineer, I'm a designer. I'm a certified professional horticulturalist. I have a degree in horticulture, and during that time when I was getting my degree, I realized that we fight with nature a lot as professionals, and we have poor drainage problems, we use a lot of chemicals, and I, as a part of my career path, wanted to do something a lot different, and I really valued ecological systems and set to find out more and went to the Wetland Science and Management program to learn about how dynamic our landscapes are and how they should be functioning, which really set a precedent for my philosophy in landscape design and got my feet wet. As you can see in the bottom left picture, that was in 1999, and I was wearing waders with Tevas, very fashion forward, and I learned a lot of what I know now by getting my hands dirty and by building these things. And now I'm doing a lot of presentations, I'm doing a lot of writing, and I basically have a passion for making ecological landscapes beautiful so that people will buy into this idea of making these landscapes a common practice in the industry. So now that there's going to be changes coming up, and some of these will be mandatory for us to be installing in our landscapes, we need to make that transition. And so first and foremost, we need to be learning about how to do this. There's a lot of trainings available, and we'll get to that in a slide coming up here. I have a lot of marketing ideas that I can pass along, what's worked and what hasn't worked. Other things that we need to know is how to estimate these projects. What are the costs involved? What do we need to know? What kind of tools do we need? And like Chris, you can learn from some of my lessons learned in the years of installing these. So some of the local trainings available, I've listed out the ones that I know of. A lot of my own crew has gone through many of these. Some of these I've taught. We do have a poll question here about if any of you have attended these trainings. We'd like to see which ones specifically. And there's a lot out there more than this list, but I think that this is a good one to start with. And what I can say from my own personal experience is start building them. If you need to learn or you need a project to start on because you don't have one to do, there's a lot of volunteer projects, specifically with the conservation districts, the 12,000 Rain Garden Program, and we get a lot of requests from people such as taking this a webinar where we can learn from professionals specifically. And so my company is going to have a workshop this summer, and you can contact me through email or on our website to find out more information about when that will be. Did you get the poll?
Yeah, that's loading.
Okay, so opportunities in the green industry. There's a lot of different types of projects. There's a lot of different scales that we could be doing these at. And like Chris's projects, a lot of those are larger, whereas my experience is mostly in the smaller residential scales. There's opportunities not only for designers and builders, but also nursery professionals in growing plants specifically for these projects. Also the suppliers like the soil mixers, the compost facilities, and so on. Can they see the poll result?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So there we go. One thing to point out about the workshops is there's going to be a different level of technical information in some of these, and even like the WSU extension, some of them are very technical, and some of them are really geared towards homeowners. So depending on what your skill level is, make sure you sign up for the ones that are most applicable to your situation. So the rebate program has really brought a lot of attention to rain gardens and low-impact development here in Seattle. The one that is on the bottom left-hand side of the picture is the first rebate project that we did, which was also SPU's first project. And we learned a lot there about paperwork, shuffling, setbacks, different specifications to meet requirements for the rebate program. A lot of people who are interested in this program that contact us aren't actually able to get rebates for whatever reason. And there's setbacks. There could be the outlet of the rain garden could be lower than where the water has to execute the site. And so some of these issues have prevented people from doing rain gardens. And one thing I want to point out, a project that we're about to start had about a quarter acre in their backyard, and because of those requirements, they weren't eligible for the rebate. But there's no reason a rain garden can't be installed based on the size and the other requirements set out there. So marketing. This is a focus of mine that I think is really important for rain gardens. Like I said, the programs that are out there are starting to get attention, but by and large, when I meet a client, most of them have never heard of a rain garden. And so I get to explain to them what that is. I get to make them excited about it. And depending on the client, I have to figure out what's going to get them excited. Is it the idea of having a water feature that doesn't require a pump or maintenance, and it works when it rains? I can play with the sexy factor of making it a ecological functioning aspect of their landscape that's really beautiful as well, and it becomes a conversation piece for a lot of our clients. Or is it a regulatory decision for them? And hopefully we can gear people towards the idea that rain gardens are beautiful and functional and exciting, and not something that is going to bog them down because of regulatory concerns. And a lot of that is us talking to our clients and educating them. And I have my own personal elevator pitch, but it's geared specifically towards the client and depending on what I believe will impact them the most and get their buy-in. Another thing that I want to point out is to have your portfolio ready. Build your experience, whether it's volunteering, get photos of work that you've done, and also social media. So in the very first slide, I had a big list of ways to contact me through social media. I'm a big believer of using that for marketing and networking, and it's all in how you use it and build relationships. But it does work for us, and one of the key things that works really well is something called Pinterest. And this is a social media, like a scrapbooking board, where we can take a project and we can pin photos to a board, either for clients or for a project type. And so my Pinterest has both. It has some for specific projects, and then it has boards for elements of our jobs. So there's one on gabion baskets, there's one on cisterns, there's one on rain gardens. And so what I can do is I can pull that out and show clients, look at this great downspout that someone did. It's very artistic, gets them excited. I pin photos from jobs that we've done as well. We also use a photo collection album online called Shutterfly, and we give our clients access to that. So every project we finish, we pin to certain boards, just like Pinterest, but it's private because we don't want to have the clients' names out there. But both of these have worked very well, both in marketing and to sell to clients as individuals when I'm doing consultations. And it's worked out. I would encourage people to try it, especially if you don't have a portfolio of rain gardens already. You can borrow images of rain gardens from other people just to get them excited. And then conventional advertising, I have to say, has never worked for my business personally, but we're definitely we're a niche company, and now that the ecological side of landscape profession is growing, we are seeing that any print or like Yellow Page, those kind of general listings just don't work for us at all. So this I had to throw in because it's a project we finished last week, and it's a very small backyard, 3-foot setbacks on each side of the house, and there's probably a total of 15 feet from the house to the back fence. And so that area that's a depression with the rushes is the rain garden, and it handles half of the roof of the house, which covers the maximum square footage of that lot that is allowed in the county, in Snohomish County. And when I first went to the site, it's all shaded and the lawn was failing. The builder put in, very minimal amount of soil, and it was just disgusting looking, and the client hated it. She didn't want to go outside ever. And so I sold her on the idea of a rain garden, and it fills the space nicely. From a scale standpoint, it works great, and she's going to have that as a centerpiece to talk to friends and family about, and it looks beautiful as well. So this slide is a little bit redundant here because we've already covered this, but I wanted to point out developing your elevator pitch for clients and trying to find pieces of this that they can latch onto or buy into. And one that seems to be really popular, whether you have a client that likes wildlife, you can tell them all about the different benefits of attracting insects and birds and different critters to their rain gardens that wouldn't necessarily happen in a lawn situation, but you can also sell it as a low-maintenance water feature, like I said before. That seems to get a lot of buy-in from my clients. And overall, you have to just figure out your clients and pick and choose. And I would suggest if you're going to be doing this and you want to be doing it a lot, whenever you see the opportunity, go for it. And if they don't like the idea, great, you try it at least. And I'm pretty sure that if you can sell it, you can start installing these on a regular basis. So, tools needed. As a landscape company, we do design, build, and maintenance. And so a lot of these tools are readily available in our toolbox, but not everybody will have a lot of these tools needed. And now it really depends on the scale and scope of your project, but for the most part, you can build simple rain gardens with the basic shovel, pickaxe, your mussel, wheelbarrows, forgot to include that one. And then if you do a lot of them, it might make a lot of sense to have handy or to rent equipment such as sod cutters. We tear out a lot of asphalt, we tear out a lot of concrete, and so jackhammers come in handy. They're fairly inexpensive to rent and pretty fun to use if you haven't used one. Transit, if you're going to do a lot of these, measuring devices for levels becomes very important. And I have a typical level shown because you can also use those as you're getting started if you don't want to buy more expensive tools. And then there's heavy equipment. We rarely use heavy equipment, but have used skid steer and excavators before. And this, again, depends on your scope of project that you're doing. So to talk about heavy equipment real quickly, like Chris said, I just want to echo, you really shouldn't be doing projects that require heavy equipment because of the soil compaction issues and other issues, but it certainly does make things go a lot quicker. And things that you want to consider, I wanted to point out, not only the weight of the machine, and I have the photo here to show weight distribution maps. This is something when we do use machinery, we always have our maps with us, and they get loaded with the tractor or the skid steer, and that distributes the weights a lot more evenly across the surface, so you do less compaction. And if you don't have the budget to buy all that stuff up front, you can use plywood if the machinery is not too heavy. We have used stall mats on occasion, which are the thick rubber mats that go in horse stalls. So something to keep in mind if you are going to use heavy machinery. And even in this climate, if it's moist out, which is fairly often, this is even a great technique to use if you have a wheelbarrow path and you're running wheelbarrows back and forth. So the other thing to consider is width. A lot of landscapes nowadays have a very minimum side yard width, which some machines won't fit through, so that's something to think about. Your digging depth or lifting capacity, these are both important depending on the depth or how far you have to reach with a certain weight. So when we install rocks, we have to be very careful that we're not going to be tipping our machine. And then another thing to factor in is skilled operators. If you don't have someone on staff that knows how to operate machinery, there is somewhat of a learning curve depending on the machine, and that could take some time. Safety is another factor. If you have crew that doesn't normally work around heavy machinery, it's a fairly dangerous part of landscaping, and it's good to do a lot of safety meetings ahead of time. And then rental fees, this is something that we'll get into with costs. So costs. There's a lot here to think about, and this is going to vary for every project and every company. And I throw out $3.50 as a square footage price because that's what the standard rebate is offering for SPU. And we have looked at this very carefully because we wanted to know if it was possible to be installing these so the homeowner didn't have to have any expense out of pocket. And our answer was no. It's not possible, but the way that our business works, we have a fair amount of overhead with just employee benefit packages and tools and things like that. So our overhead might be a lot higher than other companies. And we did come up with a worksheet that we do a pricing and description for our clients, so we can show them what 350 would get if their downspouts didn't need to be altered, or if we didn't have to trench 50 feet through rock. There's a lot of things to consider here, but it would be up to you to figure it out and how you already do estimates for your projects. So time and material is one way to look at it, which we generally do because rain gardens are all different and they have to be spec'd that way based on their sizes. And per project is another way to do it. At one point we were trying to come up with just a price for one rain garden depending on a minimum calculation for square footage. And what we found was even if that footprint of the rain garden was the same, there's so many other variables. And that could be access to the site, it could be mobilizing a crew in a certain area that has high traffic or whatnot. It could also be running pipes through an area that has heavily compacted soils in a very tight space. So there's a lot to think about here. One thing that we do, and from a marketing standpoint, when I'm designing a landscape, I will, like I said, try to put rain garden wherever I can if the site is suitable for it. And so they usually just become a part of our larger projects. When we do a renovation or we do a new construction project, it's usually just right in the plans. And so the line items don't necessarily change if we're already doing demo on the site, if we're already bringing a soil amendment in, if we're already planting the site. The rain garden just adds a little bit more to that, but in that area we might have been planting already. So the excavation and the piping are usually the two things that stand out. So I already mentioned overhead, and that's going to vary for every company. And then profit margin. If you're just getting started and you want to start building these and you want to build a portfolio, maybe you'll take less of a profit margin on rain gardens versus other aspects of your business. So the line items, just to go through this really quickly, things to think about. Demolition, like I said, we remove a lot of asphalt, sometimes concrete to just minimize impervious surface, but also as a part of our demo jobs and in order to build rain gardens where we want them. From the gutter to the ground, this is something to think about. Sometimes we have to alter the downspouts that are coming off of roofs. Sometimes we'll add cisterns, so there's plumbing involved there and different add-ons that we have. There's the inlet and then the plumbing if we're going to have any pipes that are going a certain distance to go into the rain garden. There's rock for the inlets and outlets, and a lot of times we use rock outcroppings so that we can access the rain garden in the future by stepping on the rocks rather than stepping in the soil and compacting it. So that's a maintenance benefit and also a functional benefit as well, so we don't ruin its function. Soil amendment, bioretention mix that is readily available here might cost a little bit more, but that is something that I'm just going to assume that a lot of people put into their projects when they're doing plantings anyways. Plants, another line item. Mulch, if you are going to use arborist chips, make sure you line that up. It's not always easy to get exactly what you want in the right quantities, especially if you're building a very small rain garden, and arborist chips sometimes come by the truckload of 20 yards. And then the last line item I wanted to throw in there, because I think this is another selling point, is accessories. Whether it's cistern where we can collect and use more water, or maybe a rain chain that can sell the clients on the idea of enjoying the rain when they come in to their front door and seeing it travel through a chain. Other accessories might be art. That's another fun one. A lot of times I like to get glass globes or glass little orbs to put in rain gardens. So those are kind of the fun jewels or decorations that you could add and sell the client to make it even more beautiful. So this is a sample bid sheet from a project, and this is a much larger project, but what you can see here is the bidding process and all the different line items that go into this. And so I only listed, 8 or 9. This has 25. So something to think about, and you can see the range of these different companies that were bidding on this project. This was a public information, or this was a public project, so this information is available out there, and it's usually available for a lot of projects that are in public works. So lessons learned. I wanted to share some of our experiences with you. Calculations are critical, not only the square footage calculations, but the perk test calculations. As a part of doing rain gardens, I encourage everybody to have the manual in your vehicles, wherever you need them, in your toolbox. Every single one of our trucks has one, and our crew is very familiar with all the different formulas that are necessary. The other thing is do several infiltration tests. This is very important in urban areas where you don't know what kind of soil you're dealing with a lot of the time. In Ballard, we did one job that had really horrible draining soil, and 4 feet away from one infiltration test pit, we dug another one, and it drained beautifully. So that is something to definitely look out for and to keep in mind when you are designing rain gardens. Do that ahead of time, preferably, but it's something that you might need to adapt to when you're actually doing construction too, because it's hard to know exactly how the soil is going to drain when it's excavated in an urban area. You might find some wide variations in a very small space. You might also find buried bathtubs or other kinds of weird things. It's really common. We seem to find a lot of those. So locate your utilities. Be leery of partial DIY projects or over-engineered plans for simple rain gardens. I'll get to an example of that later on. And then also, as you're building these for clients, think of having disclaimers based on whether or not they're doing part of the work, whether or not they're doing maintenance. One of the things that I would watch out for and really educate clients about is the outflow and making sure that that's cleaned on a regular basis. So grading. This is the biggest issue I see when I look at rain gardens, and I'm called out a lot of times to projects that have failed in one way or another, and I'm asked to help correct them. And this is a big one. The transits are so important, and if you don't have that, a lot of landscape companies doing hardscaping, I'm assuming, would have them, but if you're not, you can use a 4-foot level, bubble level, and put it on a long 2x4 if you need to. But water follows gravity, so make sure that the bottom of your basin is flat. I recommend to fill and run a test at each stage of installation. So when it's excavated, run your water, get muddy, get in there, and make sure that the water is going to follow the right path. It's critical in getting it to drain correctly. So here's a transit. This is a project we did several years ago. I stop by from time to time and take a peek at it, and it's interesting when you do a lawn landscape and turn it into a rain garden. Once the landscape's filled in, it just looks like a normal bed. You can't always see the depression. And I should have an after photo. I can go ahead and post one on my Pinterest board, but you can see this as it's being constructed on the Pinterest board, I believe. And the tools here are so important, and I took a picture at this stage because it shows the levels, the shovels, everything laying around, and the guys were taking a break, but part of their job was to make sure that it was just right before allowing water or amendment into the basin. So here's a lesson learned story for you. Now this is a project that we were called in after it was designed, and we were hired to do the installation and maintenance of it. And as they were excavating it, I got a little worried based on calculations I did quickly in my head, and I raised the question of, were there any perk tests done? And the answer was no. There was no perk test done. They were simply going off of a soil analysis done from a soil scientist. And I tried to caution everybody and was ready to dig the test. This was right before Thanksgiving, and we had a big storm and a 3-inch event, in fact. And so before there was amendment put in, the cells filled up very quickly. They didn't drain at all, and they blew out the sides of the weir wall. So you can see that gravel there. That was actually placed after the fact. Our crew went in right after the holiday and had to repair all of this. It is the largest rain garden in King County on a residential site, and there was a lot of problems here, but the perfect storm happened in that it was under construction. It wasn't necessarily designed correctly given the PERC test, and that site analysis wasn't done thoroughly. But we did take care of it. We found solutions. Here it is a year later. And what we ended up doing, and like Chris mentioned, small is better than big here in rain gardens. And they had the entire site draining to these cells here. And since they didn't drain, the soil level was about 4 feet down when it was excavated and the weir walls were put in, but it only drained in the top 12 inches of soil. So what we had to do was divert a lot of the water, and the system was already designed and built. So what we did is we disconnected a lot of the downspouts. There's a solar array over the garage. We just took the gutters off entirely and have little rain gardens underneath that. We took all the water from the driveway and we directed it to another rain garden. And then this large rain garden here that has the 5 cells, the bottom collects into a pond, and so we basically turned that into habitat. But the overflow of that goes into yet another rain garden and then into bioswales. So the water is still distributed on the site, but it took that event happening for the redesign. And now the landscape's beautiful, it's functioning well. We also had to change the specs in the soil and raise the grade quite a bit for it to all work correctly. So I'm a big believer that rain gardens can fit any size, site, style. Size is definitely dependent on the setbacks and the availability of space, but there's always ways to infiltrate, and depending on the landscape style, I've seen really beautiful modern rain gardens. I've seen really naturalistic ones. I've seen a lot of different ways to do this, and again, Pinterest is your friend here if you want to take a look and see what's what and what's out there. Get inspiration from that. So I'm going to wrap this up here pretty quickly. I just wanted to show a few more photos and examples. This is a rain garden at our office. This is another selling tool for us. We do meet and greets in our office, and we have client meetings. And when I'm talking about rain gardens, I can go, hey, let's go outside and take a look at one right here. And they can see the size, the beauty, see it functioning really well. And that's a good selling tool for me. So another thing I wanted to point out, and this is a series of photos, this rain garden here, all the surface area from the patio is where the water is coming from. So it doesn't always have to be from a downspout. It could be off of the patios or hardscaping surfaces that you're creating in projects. So the next photo will show you the first rain event. And so one thing that I like to do is give clients the expectations up front of what to expect. And so this rain event, the client sent me the photo, it was the first 3-inch storm, and those seem to be happening more and more regularly. So it's important to be aware the first time you put in a rain garden and you have one of these big events, your client might call you. And so prepare them in advance, and the first time a rain garden fills up and it's still pouring down rain, they might get concerned. So just prepare them in advance. And know that when rain gardens are built, the drainage seems to improve over time. And in the rain garden at our office, even in a heavy 3-inch event, we don't even see rain standing at all. And that rain garden's been in probably 6 years now, but they start to function more and more over time. So this is that same rain garden that had the big ponding during the storm, and you can see it, the second second and the third year. And this is one of my favorite rain gardens because the aesthetics were so important, and that's another big buy-in for clients. So just to wrap it up, to make sure I point out, it can be the entire front yard if you want it to be of someone's landscape, and make it a really big feature in their garden. This landscape, they came to me with just all lawn. There was nothing else, and they said, we're tired of mowing the lawn, but we want it to be interesting. We want something there. We don't want it to just be tall grasses or meadow looking. And so we created a series of pathways, and the rain garden is in the center. And what we did is, with the excavated soil, is we made berms all around it. But it's definitely a focal point in their landscape. And they called me the first time it rained, and were ecstatic to see it working. And it was such a joy to hear from them, the positive feedback. So I know there's already been a webinar on plant selection, and I just want to reiterate how important plant selection is for rain gardens, and to give you just a quick list of things to think about. Right plant, right place is something we should all know in this industry. Low maintenance plants are very important because we don't want to be going into rain gardens and compacting the soil. So anything that requires a lot of pruning or fussing with is probably a no-no for rain gardens. Wildlife habitat is important. Berries, nuts, flowers for different critters, and including ourselves, that's something to think about. And keeping in mind where the stormwater is coming from, and if it's clean. Do you want to be growing herbaceous annuals that are edible for you, or would you play it safe if, depending on your roof type, or if it's coming off of asphalt? Things to think about. And then I definitely want to encourage people to use evergreen plants, because when we have our storm events, it's usually in the winter when deciduous and herbaceous plants don't have any leaves and surface area to hold that water. So that's important. Natives are great, especially the tough ones that thrive in wet conditions for most of the winter months. Availability, I see this a lot when I see designs that are well-intentioned native plant enthusiasts, or if you've read something that sounds really exciting, if it's not available here or easy to find, I would maybe not consider using it just from a replacement standpoint, because if you have a client that really wants something and then it fails, do you really want to be playing around and experimenting in someone else's garden? And then just tough and hardy in our climate. Some of my favorite plants are rushes, and I know a lot of people think of them as weeds in the industry, but for the most part, weeds are very successful for a reason, and they're highly adaptable. So with that, I'm all done here, and I think we're ready for questions.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions here. First, for maintenance, do you see most bioretention facilities being maintained properly? Either of you?
That would, from my perspective, probably not. Probably, most stormwater management systems seem to get built and forgotten about, and that's a problem. That's not just with rain gardens and low impact development strategies, but that unfortunately applies to most stormwater management facilities are built and not adequately maintained. But the significant difference is that with a low impact development strategy, you usually know that it's not being maintained. Whereas if a vault under a parking lot in a shopping center is full of sediment and the stormwater vault's in bypass mode 80% of the time, no one knows. But if you get a little bit of moss growing on your pervious pavement, then everybody freaks out. And so I think it's important, yes, maintenance is important, but the important thing is that these strategies don't require, in my opinion, more maintenance effort than traditional stormwater management systems, but it's different, and if you don't do it, it's much more obvious.
Have you found that in your experience?
Yeah, and one thing I can say to add to the business opportunity side of things is that any landscape needs to have an establishment period thought out. And so rain gardens, especially if we're building them and forgetting about them, there's a real high possibility that we're going to have weeds that come in, really obnoxious weeds a lot of the time. So we can build that into our contracts when we're building these. hey, let us set up a temporary irrigation system for 3 years, and with that maintenance program, and it may be once a quarter, and most of ours are. And now, like the example that I used for my own office, that gets maintained once a year. So, but it took three years to get it to that point, and it's definitely a sales tool and a business opportunity to say, hey, yeah, this will be low maintenance, but we got to get it there first.
So this question is about small sites. On a small site with a 15-foot backyard, I assume that's depth, where does the overflow water from the rain garden get channeled to?
There's in the first picture that I showed of the client's project that we built last week, that had about a 15 to 20 foot depth backyard, and a lot of times these cells are small enough, but they can handle the overflow of a very large storm by simply putting in dry wells. A series of dry wells is what we usually do. And so if nobody's familiar with it, or if somebody's not familiar with it, basically you're digging like a post hole like you would for a fence post, going deep and filling it with drain rock, and the water will go down and infiltrate through that.
All right. So one person has given us a tip that I wanted to share with you. She's saying that it may be helpful to designers who are not engineers to be aware that the Rain Garden Handbook is currently being revised. I assume she's talking about the Rain Garden Handbook put out by WSU for homeowners. The updated new version will be available by early July and will be available through many local jurisdictions as well as the WSU extension. It has an improved list. Maintenance section, and plants. So thank you very much for that. Is there any other questions? All right, I think that concludes our question and answer period. Thank you very much for participating in the webinar this evening. We're going to be sending out PDFs of the PowerPoint presentations to you in the next few days. So keep a lookout for that, and these webinars will be posted on the WALP and WSNLA websites. Thanks so much. Have a great night.